You want to finish what you started? You came to the right place. Them girls that you came with, you might have to part with. Depending on how this thing shakes. Wauwatosa, Kenosha, is in the house.
What's up, Wisconsin? It is Mike Gallagher back in Washington, D.C., where this week we will be debating the next phase of coronavirus relief. Now, before we dig into that, I think it's fair to step back and just remember that so far Congress has spent or appropriated $4 trillion for coronavirus relief, a staggering sum. And of that, $1 trillion of the $4 remains unspent, including $60 billion for schools. So I do think it's fair, as we consider spending another $2 trillion, to ask, why are we doing that if $1 trillion has not been spent? Because that suggests that we won't be able to spend the $2 trillion in the time frame that's going to be meaningful for coronavirus. But as you dig into the details of the bill, you quickly realize that this is not about coronavirus. Less than 9% of the nearly $2 trillion plan goes to directly combating coronavirus through public health spending, such as vaccine distribution, tracking, contact tracing, testing, things like that. Things that I think we could all agree upon. We should help hospitals and other vaccinators cover the additional administrative burden and financial burden of getting vaccines out there as quickly as possible, so we can open up as quickly as possible. And then you go a layer deeper and you start to see there's some really silly things in here that don't have anything to do with coronavirus. There's $100 million for an underground rail system in Silicon Valley. Schumer inserted $1.5 million for the Seaway International Bridge, which connects New York to Canada. That seems like an earmark for New York by the majority leader. Interestingly, I think we all want to make sure schools are open as quickly as possible. My own view is they can open, but only 5% of the $130 billion for K through 12 schools is actually spent in this fiscal year. So we have the $60 billion that hasn't been spent yet. Now there's another $130 billion, but only 5% of that is going to be spent this year. So the bill is suggesting effectively that schools are still going to be shut down next year. I mean, that would be pure insanity if that is the case. Schools need to reopen. Otherwise, we're going to lose an entire generation of children. Almost half the bill will not be spent until 2022 or later. About 45%, or about $670 billion, is spent in 2022. And then $140 billion is not spent until 2024. So this money is years away from being spent, which further undermines the whole message that it's about coronavirus, particularly as we are ramping up vaccination and we can see the light at the end of this tunnel. This is not the right way to go about things. We should step back. We should have a much more targeted approach, a bipartisan approach, because the hard reality is that if the Democrats go down this path of passing everything on a bill like this, on a budget reconciliation bill, because that allows you to pass it in the Senate without 60 votes, and they're going to have 2 rounds of budget reconciliation, it appears they're going to try and cram everything into those 2 bills. It's going to crowd out all the other priorities that we should work together on a bipartisan basis, particularly infrastructure spending, particularly military spending, our shared recognition of the need to combat the threat posed by China. I just really think beyond the individual things in the bill that are unrelated to coronavirus, bigger picture, this is going to put us in a very difficult position, this Congress, to meaningfully address other priorities. And it's going to further continue a trend that I've talked about for a while now. And admittedly, this is a bipartisan sin. This trend of passing everything on 1 or 2 bills, these gigantic, gargantuan omnibus bills that have a bunch of unrelated provisions stuffed into them. It's not the way to run the legislative branch of government. And it's the reason, in part, the legislative branch has devolved into pure partisan political warfare and theater, and as some sort of stage for C-list celebrities to get on cable news. Is because it is such. Look at the amendment process in this bill. They consider 229 amendments, and only 2 of the 229, or less than 1%, of the Republican amendments were accepted. So they're not allowing Republican amendments. And so if you have a massive bill that you can't allow the minority party to amend, it's just going to create chaos in the institution. So I'm just urging Speaker Pelosi, my friends on the other side of the aisle, President Biden, please step back from the ledge here. There's a smarter way to do this. There's a way to do this that's targeted, that can get help to those who truly need it, and get us out of this final last stretch of coronavirus and allow us to reopen as quickly and as smartly as possible. So thus endeth my rant for the day.
The dude